Bias. Aesthetic bias. Is your beauty my beauty? Is your truth my truth? When you look into the mirror, what do you see? Do you see your biases? We all have our own separate biases. Are you able to identify them? Are you able to identify the difference between you and the person sitting next to you, between you and your patients? This story starts at Fiji Island. I went there earlier this year because I was fascinated by this concept of time and space. And in Fiji, the island of Tavuni stands the International Dateline. And on the International Dateline, you can live the same day twice. So I decided to go there, camp out on the International Dateline, and live the same day twice. This is the International Dateline. It's 180th longitude. On one side is yesterday. On the other side is tomorrow. Who makes up this time? Who decides when is today, when is tomorrow? So I became really enamored with this concept of time. Then it made me think, if you have two people, one stands on one side of the line, the other stands on the opposite side of the line. One says it's November 13th, one says it's November 14th. Who is right? Who's telling the truth? Time is relative. It's relative to your position in space. Time and space, though, for 250 years was considered to be absolute, thanks to Isaac Newton, who put forth these principles in Principia, written in 1687, the 3 laws of thermodynamics. These laws existed outside the human element. Regardless of the human perspective, they still existed. They were absolute. Yes, and these laws work. Almost always they work. They helped kick off the Industrial Revolution. No one doubted these laws. But when astronomers looked up into the sky and they saw the planets, they said, wait a second, the planets their orbits don't follow Newton's laws of dynamics. Something isn't right. Yes, it works often, but something isn't right. But no one challenged it. Until this rebel came along. He had no regard for conventional wisdom. He said, wait a second, no, time is bendable, it's malleable, it's dilatable. Time and space can morph. Past, present, and future can all exist at one time, but it depends on your position in space and how you see it, and how you see yourself compared to the others. This was really a unique way of thinking. No one really understood it for a long period of time. But now it's accepted. We recognize that. Time and space are not absolute. Time and space and truth are relative to your position in space. And it varies from other people's position in space. In other words, you're biased. You're biased when it comes to time and space. So it got me thinking, is this the same thing with aesthetic medicine? Can we say with aesthetic medicine that there's a bias? Do we know this bias? Do we recognize that we all have our own aesthetic biases? Allow me to explain how I took this tangent of time and space that was really fascinating me and started to equate it to what we do every single day. We all know this 5 formula. We learned it in medical school and residency. We've learned it in fellowship. We continue to talk about this 5 formula. And yes, the mathematics of it, they work. This is what we're taught. Understand the perfect mathematical proportions of the face and the body, and you will make a person more beautiful. Our scales are based on this. And it works. Just like Newton's laws, phi works a lot. And we can get by with it. Why? Because we like good genes. All of us like good genes. Regardless of where you come from in the world, you like good genes. Beauty and phi and fertility are all equivalent. Good genotype equals beautiful phenotype. It's a good genes theory. Good genotype, beautiful phenotype. Symmetry, large eyes, small nose, small chin, and body size ratios that are ideal. We all like this, regardless of where we come from, regardless of your culture, regardless of your gender. We all like certain components of the body. Mother Nature doesn't make mistakes. If I drop you off in Papua New Guinea and I ask you who is the most beautiful person in this culture, we'd all say the same thing, consistent across all of us. Across all of us. That's the good genes theory. We agree. And that's what we're taught. And that's how our medicine is taught. That's how our aesthetics is taught. That's how it's been taught for the last 100 years. Let's be honest. Aesthetic medicine hasn't been around that long. Really, it's a formalized science. And we've all been taught this good genes theory. But when we say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or beauty is only skin deep, we recognize that something is not right. Just like Newton's laws, and when the astronomers looked up in the sky and they said, something's not right, something's not right. We know there's something else to it. Beauty is 50% subconscious. It's mathematical, it's shared, and it's primitive. It's primitive. This works in your reptilian brain. Your archaic brain, which is consistent across all species, recognize a component of beauty. You feel this. You don't think this. When you see something beautiful, you feel better. Your amygdala lights up. You feel better when you see something beautiful. But that's not the same thing as the conscious component of it, which is interpretive, it's biased, and it's advanced. This is our advanced brain, and it's many, many things that contribute to this other component that we call beauty, such as adornments, your posture, your style, your hair color, your pheromones, and perhaps most importantly, confidence. This you think. So half of beauty is what you feel, half is what you think. If you bring these two together, you get what I call attractiveness. And attractiveness is ultimately what we're aiming to achieve. Attractiveness. This is where we exist. We don't just make people beautiful, we have to make them attractive. We have to understand both components, the part that we feel and the part that we think. They're two separate components. So while we all agree on beauty, there's no doubt, Mother Nature put that into us. We were born with that. We seek it out. We don't all agree on what's attractive. There we differ just a bit. Why? Well, yes, somewhat of our cultures. Our cultures help to do it, but why else do we differ? Our genders? Do men and women think differently? Perhaps. How about our training? Is a rhinoplasty surgeon different than a dermatologist? Different than a plastic surgeon? Do we look at things differently? Do we see the body differently? I would say so. For anyone who goes to different meetings with different specialties, you recognize we look at things differently. We see different things when we look at the face. Let's look at a study looking at lip size. This was published in 2017, Aesthetic Surgery Journal. Lip size preference by country. Looking at both surgeons and the public, asking them what size lips they like best. And let's see what they said. Doctors versus public. If you look at these lips, which size lips do you like best? What did doctors say? What did the public say? Well, Asian doctors tended to like the biggest lips. But Asian patients like the smallest lips. Seemed to be a little bit of a disconnect. Latin American people like the biggest lips. That public. European doctors like the smallest lips. But across all cultures, patients generally like their lips, or the public like the lips bigger than the doctors. So the consumer wants bigger lips than what the doctors were liking. So based on your ethnicity, your gender, your background, it may alter the size of lips you like. How about butt size? Same thing there too. If I show you these butts, which one do you like best? What did the doctors say? Well, almost everyone liked the same size. This one. Except for one group. Anyone want to guess which group that was? The Latin Americans. They like size 6. Okay, breast size, an areola shape. How about that? 614 responses, 29 countries. What was the most popular? What was liked the best? Well, once again, our Brazilian colleagues like the biggest areola and breast sizes, and the German one's the smallest. So the Europeans like the smallest lips, hips, breasts, and butts, and the Latin Americans like the biggest. Does that show true in our audience here? I don't know, but we're going to find out afterwards, because we're going to ask you your opinions, and we're going to collate it, and we're going to figure out what we all think, what's our preferences. This concept really excites me, interests me, and this is where I'm spending a lot of my efforts right now, is familiarity. Do you like what you see? Is beauty inherently beautiful, or is it because you see it all the time that you get used to it and you start to like it more and more? Now, we like what we see. Something that you see a lot, you tend to like. Of course, what do you like the most? Yourself. You like nothing more better than yourself, because you see yourself all the time. How about your mate? Does your mate look like you? Do you fall in love with people that look like you? Do you like to do business? Do you like to do work? Do you like patients that look like you? Here's a study that was done by this guy named Bruno Lang out of University of Tromsø in Norway. He really interests me. So he looked at people, lovers, and he tried to figure out what they like. So what does he like? Well, he likes his girlfriend, of course, but if you mix in 22% of his face, he likes her even better. And he likes that better than if you mix in someone like Angelina Jolie. He thinks it looks better if he sees himself. How about her? What does she like? Well, she likes her boyfriend, of course. But if you mix in some of her, 22% of her, if you morph it in, she likes it better than if you put in someone like Brad Pitt. So what happens, what that means is we like our lovers to look a little bit like us. How much? 22%. 11% is too little. 33% is too much. But we like people that look like us. We're attracted to that. And there's a genetic reason for that as well. There's a concept in art called face fusion. Face fusion is where the artist paints themselves more often than the person sitting in the chair. Every portrait is a portrait of the artist, not the sitter. It's the painter or the artist himself on the canvas that reveals himself. This was Oscar Wilde, and certainly there's a truth to this. And I recognize this myself because I was a sculpture artist for a while, and I did one of my first pieces, and my instructor said to me, "Steve, that looks really good, except it doesn't really look like the model. It looks more like you." I'm like, "It doesn't look like the model?" No, we struggle to make art look different than ourselves, but I'm not the only one. Look at Raphael painting his wife. Look at Rembrandt painting his wife. And look at Rubens painting his wife. They all paint someone else that looks like themselves. We paint people to look like yourself. This is a very common concept in art. Does the same thing exist in aesthetic medicine? Do crazy-looking doctors have crazy-looking patients? I'm sure you've seen some of the ads out there, and this doctor's sitting there with his whole staff. You're like, oh my gosh, they all look so bizarre. They become distorted. I know Kate's going to touch on this in a little bit. They become distorted when they see the same thing all the time. So I looked at my own bias, because we always have to look at our own biases. This is a patient I operated on. Yeah, I did her nose. She kind of looks like me. Do I like patients that look like me? Maybe. Which is a good thing unless you want my nose. So while there's so much we agree on, yes, we agree on a lot. But due to our biases, there's things that we don't agree on. There's a lot of things we don't agree. Your attractive may be different than my attractive. Your specialty may be different than my specialty. Your spiritual background may be different than my spiritual background. Your culture might be different than mine. Your appearance might be different than mine. Your gender might be different than mine. And your position in space and how you see the world and your truth may be different than mine. Our truths are a little bit different also. It doesn't mean one's right or one's wrong. It just means that we have a different perspective in how we look at it. Does the same go with our patients? Is our bias different than their bias? Do we see things differently than them? I like large hips, lips, and breasts. She could really use a lot. But the patient just wants her nasal tip reduced. That's all she's asking to do. So we have to be able to see it from their perspective. It's very easy for me to tell someone, this is what you need. But sometimes it's not what they need. We need to know our own biases. We need to know our own biases and our position in space and how it relates to others. So how do we do that? The best way to do that is expanding our reference range. The more we travel, the more cultures, disciplines, and ideas that we expose ourselves to, the better we become to dissipating our biases. If we step into someone else's space, our biases dissipate when we walk into their space. We see things differently than them. And the same is true, really, beyond that, right? Think about politics, religion, culture. It's not just aesthetics. When we step into someone else's space, when we look at it from their position in space, our biases dissipate. So let's go back to my couple. November 13th, November 14th. Who is right? Who's telling the truth? They both are. They're both telling the truth. They just need to step into each other's spaces and see it. The same goes with our patients. We need to step into their space in order to see their position in space, their bias. And with our colleagues, we need to see it from their position. Yes, those from Latin America, those from North America and Asia, we may see things differently. By stepping to the space, we see it. So our aesthetics and our truths are relative to our positions in space. To know another's position in space, you have to step over that line. Just step over that line and be willing to stand in their position in space. This weekend, we're all going to be treated. We're going to share similarities. We're going to dialogue differences. We're going to break down the borders and boundaries and barriers that separate us all. You're going to hear from wonderful speakers from all around the world who are going to give you their biases and their perspectives. But the key is you have to have an open mind. You have to have an open mind to someone's biases that are different than yours. And you have to have a willingness to listen. And the question I ask you all is, are you ready for it? Thanks so much for listening.